What if I told you some of the biggest legends in classic rock weren't who the industry told you they were? Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, Elton John, Rob Halford, all iconic, all groundbreaking. But there's one thing they never talked about openly, and it changed rock music forever. Because behind the leather, the glitter, and the stadium lights, classic rock had a hidden history, and most fans still have no idea. And one of them helped invent the entire image of heavy metal. And it starts with the man who defined what heavy metal even looks like. Leather, chains, the biker aesthetic, the metal god himself, Rob Halford. Because the image that became the blueprint for all of heavy metal didn't come from aggression alone. It came from a world most fans never expected. And he wasn't the only one. If you asked a metalhead in 1980 who the toughest man in rock was, they'd point straight to Rob Halford. As the frontman of Judas Priest, he pioneered the leather, chains, and biker aesthetic that became the uniform of heavy metal. But here's the twist. Halford was pulling that look straight from gay BDSM and leather subcultures in London and New York. He was hiding in plain sight by leaning into the most hyper-masculine image possible. It wasn't until 1998 that he came out publicly saying, "I think most people know, but it's a wonderful moment when you step out of the closet." And instead of turning on him, the metal world embraced him. Then there's Freddie Mercury, a man who redefined what it meant to be a frontman. Freddie never made a formal coming out announcement, but his life was a masterclass in queer expression. While early media focused on his relationship with Mary Austin, his later life and his music told a more complex story. Songs like Bohemian Rhapsody and I Want to Break Free have long been interpreted as reflections of his inner world. And even when Queen shocked audiences with drag in the I Want to Break Free video, Freddie never backed down. He lived his final years openly with Jim Hutton, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest performers of all time. Long before David Bowie took Ziggy Stardust mainstream, there was Jobriath. In 1972, he became the first openly gay artist signed to a major label. The industry pushed him hard, but the world wasn't ready. Faced with intense backlash, his career collapsed. Today, he's remembered as a cult icon who was simply too far ahead of his time. Now here's one that catches a lot of classic rock fans off guard. Pete Townshend. In a 1989 interview, Townshend actually described himself as probably bisexual and talked pretty openly about feeling boxed in by his own public image. For someone seen as a larger-than-life rock icon, that kind of honesty was a big deal at the time. And then there's his song Rough Boys, which many people read as a kind of coming-out anthem. It's a great reminder that some of rock's toughest, most rebellious figures were carrying stories and identities that didn't always match the image the world had of them. Fun fact, Townshend has long been known as a boundary pusher, not just musically, but culturally. Moments like this show how rock history is full of quiet, personal revolutions hiding behind loud guitars. You can't talk about queer rock history without the architects of glam, David Bowie, Elton John, and Boy George. Bowie turned androgyny into an art form, giving outsiders everywhere permission to exist boldly. Elton John came out first as bisexual in 1976, at a real cost to his career, before later identifying as gay. And Boy George brought gender fluidity straight into mainstream pop culture, redefining what a star could look like. While the mainstream was busy chasing glitter and glam, the underground was out there telling the real, rough-edge stories that didn't make it to prime time. Lou Reed didn't just write a catchy song with Walk on the Wild Side. He cracked open the door for queer narratives in popular music, slipping complex, very real lives into the middle of mainstream radio. A lot of people were humming along without even realizing they were singing about trans and queer characters. That's how subversive and brilliant it was. Then you've got Joan Jett, who basically built an entire career on saying nope to whatever box the industry tried to shove her into. She didn't play by the rules, didn't soften her image to make anyone comfortable, and in doing so, she carved out space as a queer icon on her own terms. Her legacy isn't just about hits, it's about defiance, autonomy, and showing that you don't have to fit the mold to change the culture. Fun fact, for years, a lot of radio stations and labels tried to tone down or ignore the queer subtext in both Reed's and Jett's work. But that's the thing about underground stories. They have a way of resurfacing, and once you hear them, you can't unhear them. To really get what's going on in this story, you've got to rewind all the way back to where it truly starts, with Little Richard. Before Elvis, before the Beatles, before all the names that usually get the spotlight, there was Little Richard, the self-proclaimed architect of rock and roll. And honestly, that title isn't an exaggeration. A lot of the sound and swagger we now take for granted in rock started with him. Picture this, it's the 1950s in the segregated American South. Little Richard is a black, queer man stepping on stage in makeup, sequins, and wild energy. That look wasn't just about style or shock value, it was a kind of armor. His flamboyance became both a form of self-expression and a way to navigate a world that was hostile to who he was. Fun fact, so many rock legends, from the Beatles to Jimi Hendrix, have openly credited Little Richard as a major influence. So when we talk about the roots of rock and roll, we're not just talking about a sound, we're talking about a person who reshaped what was possible on stage just by daring to be unapologetically himself. Before glam rock exploded into the mainstream, there was Marc Bolan. As the frontman of T-Rex, Bolan helped pioneer the glitter, makeup, and androgynous style that would define an entire era. He openly challenged traditional ideas of masculinity in rock, blurring lines in a way that felt both rebellious and strangely effortless. Long before it was widely accepted, Bolan proved that identity in rock didn't have to fit into a single box. At a time when image was everything, Dusty Springfield was navigating fame on her own terms. While she never made a major public announcement during her peak years, she later spoke openly about her relationships with women. In the 1960s, that kind of honesty could have ended a career overnight. But Dusty's influence and her voice carried far beyond the limits the industry tried to place on her. And then there's Janis Joplin, one of the most unapologetically raw voices rock has ever seen. She didn't just step outside the expectations placed on women at the time, she blew right past them, on stage and off. Janis had relationships with both men and women, and she never tried to sand down her edges or squeeze herself into a more acceptable image just to make other people comfortable. In a world obsessed with fitting in, Janis Joplin doubled down on being herself, fully and fiercely, no matter what it cost her. Fun fact, when she performed at Woodstock in 1969, she was already a legend in the making, and her raspy, soul-bearing style went on to influence generations of artists who saw in her a permission slip to be completely, messily, brilliantly themselves. For decades, the industry tried to package these artists into neat categories: tough guys, heartthrobs, rebels. But the truth is, rock and roll has always belonged to the outsiders. So the next time you blast your favorite anthem, remember, you're not just hearing music, you're hearing the sound of barriers being broken. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and stay loud.